Hi again, and welcome to MC221 Media Elements. Third week of the semester, and we're beginning the third week with Chapter 3 in your textbook. We will be in this chapter all week long, although we won't finish the discussion in this set of PowerPoint slides. Chapter 3 is all about news writing basics. It's a continuation of some of the concepts that we have talked about in previous lectures, but I'm also going to be presenting some new information today about a model of writing called the inverted pyramid. Perhaps you've heard of this before in another course, perhaps not. So I'll give you a full explanation during this lecture today. And I also want to talk about your first major writing assignment, excuse me, and that's the newspaper story assignment. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is to pause the playback of the lecture, and while it's paused, go to Moodle and look for that third week calendar block, and within it you'll find the link to the news writing story assignment, the instructions for how to prepare that. And while you're in pause, please print that assignment and have it by your side as we work our way through these lectures, because I want to make certain that we cover the important points of the instructions, and having them there in front of you to refer to them as I make comment about them, I think will make understanding the instructions a whole lot easier. Today we're going to begin with a review out of Chapter 2 to review the definition of news, because understanding news values is perhaps the most important, not the only, but the most important objective of your news writing story assignment. And then what we're going to add new to the discussion today, some more information about news values, and this approach to telling news stories that we call objectivity. It's an approach that's been practiced for, about 120 to 130 years in American journalism, and you'll see that it really represents a good way to ensure that the news that we report is factual, accurate, and concise. So let's get started with the review. We ask in Chapter 2, what is news? Do you recall our discussion about these values that editors use? They apply it to a set of facts to determine whether or not the story that is written from those facts is in fact newsworthy. Is it something that deserves to be published in the newspaper or on the website? And we won't go back through the discussion of each one of these individually. If you feel like that would help you, you can certainly go back and listen and watch the Chapter 2 lesson again. But as you see down in the bottom of the screen in red, the important part of this part of the lecture is making certain that you know how to apply the knowledge about news values as you work through the news writing story assignment. Three things that we'll talk about now that make writing for a newspaper, or writing any kind of news for that matter, makes it different from other forms of writing. The first thing that we could talk about is space. Mentioned briefly in Chapter 2, but certainly worth reiterating. There are constraints on space in a newspaper. It's not possible for a newspaper to literally continue to add pages of information and increase the size of the newspaper to an extent where the cost of publishing the newspaper is not matched by the revenues of selling the paper and the advertising within it. There has to be a practical limit, even though I guess theoretically you could continue adding pages to put in everything you want. But whether or not that's economically feasible, that clearly is a different point altogether. So the writer, the reporter, the journalist, whichever term you prefer, needs to be able to apply news values to weed through the sets of information and determine which pieces are absolutely essential to telling the story in its entirety and correctly, and then maybe determine, well, what are the pieces of information that might be nice to have in there, but they don't really add that much to the telling of the story. That's extraneous information, and a writer should learn to identify that and then to delete it from the story. Newspaper articles have to be understandable. The readership of a newspaper generally tends to be a rather large mass audience, people of varying backgrounds, of varying demographics in terms of age, gender, of income, of racial ethnicity. So we're writing the kind of information that could possibly be read by a really wide variety of people. So we need to learn how to write in a manner that can be easily comprehended regardless of the person and their individual background who is reading the story. Reader choice would be the third consideration here. You know, we all, when we pay attention to the media, whether it's reading an article in a newspaper or watching a show on TV or listening to maybe a song on Spotify, we can choose anytime we wish whether or not to abandon what we're doing, to bail out of reading or listening or watching, or you know, if it's compelling enough and we're interested sufficiently, we can choose to continue to read the article. So we need to be mindful that people are in control of their consumption of the media, and in order to convince them to continue to read the information that we've written, we need to present it to them in a compelling way, in such a way that will make them want to continue reading. You know, if we don't get their attention quickly, if we don't engage them and give them something meaty that they want to continue to read, well, pretty good chance we'll lose them and they'll move on to other considerations. Pages 36 through 41 undertake the discussion of what is called objective journalism. This, as I said a moment ago, is an approach to news writing. It's been practiced for about 120 or 30 years or so, and it relies on the inverted pyramid style of writing as a method for presenting the facts and information. Now, the next slide is going to show you a graphic of the inverted pyramid model. It also appears in your textbook, and I'll have that page number coming up for you in just a moment. It's located in Chapter 3. But here's the idea. In the inverted pyramid style of writing, if you can picture a triangle, a pyramid, that has been turned upside down, in other words, the base is in the air and the point is resting on the ground, we've inverted it, we've flipped it over, turned it over, and the model suggests that when we write, we write in such a way that the information sort of filters down from large and lengthy at the top to a smaller section at the bottom. And in the inverted pyramid form of writing, the most important information, what we call the summary info, all of that goes into the first paragraph of the article that we write. Then every paragraph that we write subsequent to that, in each succeeding paragraph, as we work our way down the pyramid, we include important material, but it's in each level, the material in that level is not as important to the story as the information that appears in the section above it. Now, there's a reason that the objective model and the inverted pyramid style of writing were adopted, and it goes back to the 1800s in terms of origin. And the idea was that if a journalist wrote a story of, let's say, maybe 15 paragraphs, and each paragraph has important information, but you know, that info that's in paragraphs 13 and 14 and 15 at the bottom of the story, not nearly as important as what's in paragraphs 1, 2, or 3, or even beyond that. And so if the story is written long, in other words, the information that's presented there goes into great detail, and the editor doesn't have enough space, enough physical space in the newspaper to make the story fit, then the editor can trim away the 13th, 14th, and 15th paragraphs. The story won't be quite as complete as it once was, but it certainly will be complete enough that the reader can make sense, and the editor is able to fit the story into the space that has been out for it. So, again, as a reminder of this information, page 40 in your textbook is where this piece of graphic art, it's sort of like an infographic that we talked about in chapter 2. In the first paragraph, you put the most important story information, the most important facts. And then as the paragraph, as the story continues, the second paragraph, which falls directly behind it, gives more background information, more details. And then the third paragraph, still more details. Fourth paragraph, so forth and so on. And then you get down to the bottom of the pyramid. And we have continued adding paragraphs of information, but the information that's appearing in for example, the fifth, sixth, seventh paragraph certainly is important, but not nearly as important to telling and understanding the story as what has been written in the lead paragraph and the information beyond. So we need some rules of thumb about how to write for the inverted pyramid style. Let's begin it with this. Summarize the information in the first paragraph. Now, how do you go about determining the information that you're going to put into that lead sentence and into that lead paragraph? So, we're going to talk about how we can approach that. Summarize first, explain later is the rule of thumb. And by the way, this box appears in your textbook. The author asks the question, is the inverted pyramid style of reporting and writing, is it applicable to every instance of a news story? And, well, the fact is that if we read a series of stories that have been written in this style, the manner of the writing becomes a little repetitive to us, and the information in the story may not always appear in a logical to us. So by and large, in most instances, we're going to be writing using that inverted pyramid model, but we're not going to be necessarily using it on every story that we write. Objectivity, as opposed to its counterpart, subjectivity, is an interesting approach. Interesting in the sense that to be objective as a reporter means that who you are as a person and your personal opinions and biases should not be a part of how you report and tell your story. You as the individual reporter, your makeup, if you will, I don't know that that's the best term, but that's the one I'll use for right now. Who you are as a person should not be evident in the way that you gather your facts, choose which to put in the story, and the manner in which you tell that story. Your personal opinions should not be evident in the way that you write. Objectivity always calls for accuracy, to be as truthful as is humanly possible, and to treat all of the subjects in the story, to treat them fairly. So, what we want to do as reporters is to learn how to gather the information, gather the facts, tell the story, allow the story to stand for itself, but we don't inject our opinion. Let me repeat that. We don't insert or inject our opinion into the storytelling. We report only the facts. We allow the readers to draw their own conclusions. Now, by the way, look at the purple box here. Not to say that newspapers don't have a place where opinion can be expressed, but we must understand that any time that in a blog or any time in the newspaper itself, when an editor or a reporter writes an article in which personal opinion is a part of the content, that content must be clearly labeled as opinion. Now, pages 38 and 39 of your textbook talk about the 5 W's. This is another way of using your knowledge, applying your knowledge of reporting to the facts in order to prepare the story. And so the 5 W's and the H that we'll talk about also that we'll add to this. This is an approach to learn how to write a good summary lead paragraph for your story. Pages 38 and 39, this graphic, I think it shows up on page 38, who, what, when, where, why, okay? I'm not going to try and take you through all of the fine print here. You can take a look at that for yourself, but let's talk about some specific information on the 5 W's. The who is the first, and finding out who the who is in the story certainly gives us a way to engage the reader, because this is information that readers are interested in knowing. The who, as your author in the textbook says, the who keeps it real. Tell us who's involved, who's being affected by the story. These are kinds of pieces of information that really make your writing very engaging. It draws the reader into your story. The second W, the what, I think, doesn't that speak for itself? Along with the who, this is where the real meat of the story can be found. The what that is happening, or the what that has happened, the fire, or the political discussion, or the basketball game, the what. When is a time reference. We remember from our discussion of news values the importance of timeliness. You know, there's nothing as old as yesterday's news. So timeliness is a news value that we express by following the when model and making certain that we get that information written into our story, either when it happened or when it's going to happen. The where, talk about the location. This is that proximity news value. The where is important because the closer it is to the reader, generally speaking, the greater the interest in the reader that they would have in the story. Now, in telling the where, many times it's helpful to provide them with additional information, such as a map or a diagram. That's pretty easily done in today's business of newspapering, because there are computer applications, software apps, that make the creations of maps and diagrams very simple. And certainly adding them to a website, a newspaper story website, can be very simply done, for example, with Google Maps, and can really add to the ability of the reader to understand more about the where of the story action. The why might be the most difficult model for us to follow, because determining the explanations in the story can be difficult. Understanding the causes of why something happened may not necessarily be immediately apparent to us or to the principals of the story, and if we don't understand them, then we can explain those to the reader. But if they can be included, certainly it makes the news more meaningful. And the 5 W's also include sometimes the how. Many times the how gets omitted because there simply isn't enough space to explain it. But the fact is, over time, newspaper editors have learned that when you print stories that give people the how-to information, they really enjoy reading those. Now, again, we're continuing this lecture today. I guess everything that we're talking about is going to be applicable to the way that you prepare your newspaper storytelling assignment, your news writing assignment. So let's talk about the instructions for this particular assignment. Call for you to include both a direct quote and an indirect quote in your story. So let's just pause for a moment. Well, don't pause the playback. Let me divert from this PowerPoint slide and just talk to you about the instructions for the assignment. There are a list of bullet points on the printed page there in the instructions, and I'm going to ask you to follow those very carefully. Many times I've had students who didn't follow these instructions carefully, and they wind up losing credit on the assignment simply because they didn't follow the instructions carefully enough. So you're going to be including in your story a direct quote. Now, the instructions for the assignment: you're going to become a reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and you're going to be gathering the facts and telling the story about the death of a young 18-year-old prostitute in a rather seedy, rundown downtown St. Louis hotel. Now, what makes this story interesting is that at about the time the body of this young 18-year-old prostitute is being discovered, that a United States senator has been seen in the vicinity of this hotel. And so the police are going to question this United States senator, and he's going to have comments that are going to be expressed through his press secretary. There are going to be interviews that have been conducted with various people, the owner of the motel, a police lieutenant, and so their comments are going to be, you'll notice that they're indicated within the instructions for the assignment. And so to demonstrate your understanding of news value, you'll determine which of these people you think need to be quoted in this story, and you're going to determine the way in which they will be quoted, and that is either directly or indirectly. So let's talk about that approach. The sentence in red: the fire began in the basement, Tom Moss, Anytown Fire Chief, said. In this instance, the sentence, "the fire began in the basement," we put quotation marks around that information because those are the exact words that the fire chief, Tom Moss, spoke. This is called attributing the source. We place the attribution at the end of the sentence. So the fire chief says the fire began in the basement, and then we tell the reader who said that and what are his credentials. It's not only that we identify him by name, but we identify him by his official position. So this is a direct quotation as opposed to an indirect quotation. We use the direct quotation as a means of clarifying the facts of the story. Now, if the direct quotation in and of itself isn't clear enough, it is acceptable to insert the additional information that will make the sentence more readable, more logical, and more understandable. And so in this instance, in the third bullet point at the bottom of the page, note that parenthetically, I have inserted the information, "the house was." And so the fact that phrase, "the house was," is enclosed within the parentheses, that's telling the reader that you as the reporter have added those three words in order to make the sentence more understandable to the reader. So it is possible to put within parentheses the information that you think is needed to clarify what is being said. Now, if we want to tell the reader the expression of Tom Moss, the words that he said, but we don't want to use a direct quotation, we could write a sentence in which we use an indirect quote. We're still telling the reader the gist of what the newsmaker said. We're just not telling it in the exact words that the newsmaker originally used. An indirect quotation is attributed. We paraphrase rather than quote what the newsmaker said, and because it's not exact words, then we don't use the quotation marks. Again, continuing on with information that you'll need in order to prepare your assignment, we'll talk about how to construct your sentences in the basic summary lead. We want to write short, simple, direct, understandable sentences. Subject, verb, object. Okay? And we need to understand that as we write, we need to go back and look at the structure of our sentences and question ourselves, hey, am I meeting that objective there? Have I written a sentence that is presenting the information in that order? Subject, verb, and object. The nut graph, G-R-A-F, I don't know why in shortening the word paragraph to graph, the journalism industry chose GRAF as opposed to GRAPH. It doesn't matter. GRAF, GRAPH doesn't matter. They're both sort of shortened slang for the word paragraph. And as you look on page 48, you'll see that this is the kind of paragraph, the writing within that paragraph is what tells the readers the real point of the story. And that's where you can further flesh out the information by including any information about the 5 W's that didn't make it into the lead sentence or the lead paragraph. And the nut graph is another place where you can add a supporting quotation to help further amplify the facts of the story. So take a look at page 48 and read what Tim Harrower has to say about the nut graph. That's a very common expression that you'll hear in newsrooms, either for print or for broadcast. Now, let's group around this idea of accuracy. It is so important that we understand the importance of accuracy. If you want to bring to a screeching halt your career in the journalism profession, then start playing loose and fast with the facts. Start practicing careless journalism, not checking your facts and checking them twice, doing things like misspelling names, getting ages wrong, addresses wrong. If you're not dedicated to accuracy, you need to be questioning. Now, this is my opinion, but you need to be questioning if, in fact, journalism is the right profession for you. And I think it's fair to say that this is an important approach to follow in any profession, regardless of what it might be. But let's keep it within the context of the practice of journalism for right now and take a look at what is mentioned, not in chapter 3. We have to go all the way into the textbook to page 143 to find this quotation. And I guess it's maybe a little bit of feel-good for us. The fact is, regardless of how careful we might be, occasionally a mistake is going to occur. And that's why it's important when you write a story that you read it carefully, you proofread it carefully, you spell check it, and then you pass it along to your editors who also are going to proofread it. But as the quote says, sadly, we're only human, and there will be occasions in which the wrong information is reported. Here's a page from Broadcasting Magazine. This is a trade journal that is read by people who work in the broadcasting industry, particularly those who own radio and television stations and the managers who are responsible for their operation. Each week, the magazine profiles an important person in the broadcast industry. And here's an article about a person named Rocco Commisso. He's a very important businessman in the cable television industry. And so on this page, they tell a little bit of his background. It's a feature story about this individual. But, and I don't know if you can read it clearly as it appears, so, excuse me. Let me blow up the page for you a little bit and take a look at the caption underneath Mr. Commisso's picture. I fire people for typos. Now, if that's not a strong statement about the importance of accuracy in your writing, I don't know what is. But as I said a while ago, one of the surest ways to bring an end to your career as a mass media journalist is to play fast and loose with the facts. Some examples out of our local newspaper, and not to pick on any one newspaper. As I said a while ago, it's possible for these errors to occur in newspapers of any size, just as they occur in radio and television broadcast and on websites. They do occur, doesn't make it any better that they happen, but the one thing that a media organization would want to do if it makes a mistake is, as soon as that mistake is identified, to try and figure out the way to correct it, to correct the information, and then to publish it in the next available edition. So in this instance, if you look, this is sad that this mistake occurred, but it did. Dorothy Herbst should not have been identified as deceased. The Missourian regrets the error. Well, certainly they do. This maybe the reporter was just not paying careful attention to what they were doing. Maybe there was a rush in the newsroom to get a story prepared in time to be published. These kinds of things happen. We try to avoid them at all risk, but they do happen. And the important thing is to make certain that they, once they're identified, that they are researched and the correct information is published. The Society of Professional Journalists, this is an organization of people who make their livings as reporters and editors, and they do have a code of conduct, if you will, that describes the way that a professional journalist should conduct themselves in the process of going about their daily routines. So you can go out to the SPJ website, just Google SPJ, and it'll take you right to their website, and you can read all you would want to read about journalism ethics. I'm not going to dwell on this slide in this lesson, simply because later this semester we'll have an entire chapter devoted to journalism ethics. Again, some examples of some problems that appeared in our local paper, and you can see on this particular day's edition, they are correcting 4 different mistakes that occurred. And, like I say, these things happen. Try as you best, to ensure that they don't happen, but they do creep in, and it's the newspaper's responsibility to ferret out the correct information and to publish it in the next available issue. Okay, another example, look at the italics, the very first paragraph underneath the headline. This story appeared in Tuesday's edition and contains several errors, and so rather than publish a set of corrections, they just decided to republish the entire story and correct the erroneous information that was within the story. So, with respect to your news writing story assignment, let's understand the importance of accuracy, the importance of naming individuals, for instance. The difference between John Doe and John W. Doe, that middle initial, that's important to include the full name. Well, full first name, last name, and initial, because John W. Doe helps to separate the information from John P. Doe or John Q. Doe, and the reader knows exactly the person or has the information to identify the person in the story more fully and more completely. This one I almost hate to show you. I find it rather embarrassing that in this instance, the groom in this engagement story, his surname, his last name, is spelled 3 different ways in this story. In the headline, M-E-Y-R. In the cut line to the photograph, M-E-Y-E-R. And then in the first paragraph, still yet a third way, M-Y-E-R. Well, I hate to end on such a sad note, sad in the sense that good, accurate journalism apparently somehow got lost by the wayside in this story. But again, these kinds of things happen. I just hope that it doesn't happen to you in your engagement announcement in the newspaper if you choose to